And I repeat of our Twitter poll question this morning, this being a holiday, how are you celebrating Moi Day? As a Kenyan, would love to know how it is that you're choosing to celebrate Moi Day. And in case you're just joining us, this is Newsroom. On Wednesdays, we sort of put a spotlight on us as journalists, as the Fourth Estate, and take a look at how it is that we're doing when it comes to telling stories. So this morning, we want to take a look at events that have shaped the media industry across the years. So allow me to reintroduce my panel again. Very closer to me, I have Evans Wafula. He is a journalist and communication consultant. At the center, Professor Macharia Munene. He's a history lecturer at USAU as well as an author. And at the far end, I have Rose Lucalo, who's a veteran journalist. All right, so Rose, let me begin with you. Perhaps take me back. How was it doing stories, being a journalist, covering stories during Mzee Moi's era then?
Well, I mean, the question in Kenya has always been the political story. The other stories nobody cares about. If you're covering water,
it's always the political stories.
It's always the political stories that get you in trouble. And at that time, it was, you have to remember, like KTN was the first private TV station. There was everything, the only other TV was KBC and radio. And so you have a situation where everybody is watching this channel, and it's trying to be different from what has been there before. So everybody's on tenterhooks with every story. There's the challenge of balancing being on the edge, on the cutting edge, telling the truth, bringing what's relevant to the fore, and staying open, basically, because with the one order, the doors would be closed.
Right.
So we were very much on tenterhooks. There were a lot of spies around. There were a lot of people posted into newsrooms, posted at press conferences, just to take back information to, I don't know who they took the information to, but we would see journalists who maybe spoke out at a press conference,
asked the wrong question,
they're detained, they're in trouble.
Right.
People like Paul Amina. You would see stories. If we covered a story that touched somebody, something as innocent, it sounds innocent, like NSSF investments, or a sale of their land, you get a phone call in the newsroom and they don't even identify themselves. So you don't know who you're talking to. You just know it's somebody big trying to intimidate you on the other side, So it was very much a situation where you had to tread very carefully because you don't know who's involved in what. And as we found out later, just by uncovering stories, it's almost every sector of Kenya had a big person doing a dirty deal, and you wouldn't even know until you try to cover the story. Sometimes the story is killed, you're just ordered. That story, we're not doing it. And you'd ask, why are we not doing that story? And we've put all our energies into that story.
Yeah. I think every journalist has gone through that, where you worked so hard on a story only for it to be killed.
Yes.
I think it's us as journalists who can really sympathize with that feeling.
And I think that's why, a lot of people say, oh, the media is not telling the truth. But what I've come to learn is that very often the media is on the front seat, the front row of events. And usually the story takes time to unfold. And if you wait 4 or 5 years, you'll find actually the person was telling the truth about that situation.
Right.
So I tend to believe journalists in their effort. Of course, there's some unscrupulous ones, but it was very, very tenuous at that time.
And you've touched on freedom, which we will come and also discuss and tackle. Evans, for you?
I think covering Moi was both interesting, but it's also a bit, about, as she said, risky. This was the Mkulima #1.
Yes.
He was Mtukufu, he was Baba, he was like everything that associated with might was associated with Moi.
Right.
But also, I think, apart from politics, the most interesting thing to cover was Harambes. During Moi's time, Harambes were major.
Yeah.
And everybody should be there. Like the entire cabinet should actually appear when...
At a Harambe.
At a Harambe, that Moi is supposed to appear. And everybody has to bring something. If you don't bring something, you can even lose your seat. So most journalists would really appear in Harambes to cover Harambes. But what interested me was the weekly review and the Nairobi Law Monthly, when they started emerging. And there was really a lot of pressure from the university lecturers, from, I think you remember Pambana.
Yes.
The leaflets that were emerging, because journalists were actually sort of like entered into self-censorship. Some of them actually self-censored themselves because you avoid to cross the path of the Moi machinery. It was really powerful because, as she has said, like journalists would be picked from their houses, and so, you know, we were not in the era of technology. You would even write a story on a paper to just go and because everywhere you are, you would want to write a story and carry a copy of the story to the newsroom, probably because you fear, even when you're writing a story, you don't trust even the person sitting next to you. There were malls. Malls were covered.
And you didn't know who is who.
Yeah, you didn't know who is who. And you remember even after, and then Moi's timing for news was obvious. You know, the 1 o'clock announcements were very, very common. And as opposed to now, the proliferation of the media, we can see like there's a lot of space. And Moi was not shying away from criticizing the journalists, the media. He would even mention your name in a rally. And by mention of your name, it is actually an executive order that something must be done to you.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
All right. We are grateful for those that went before us. We stand on their shoulders today with the Kenyan media. So of course, Moi Day also looks at, helps us reflect as a nation and takes us back within our history and where we've come from. So Professor Munene, on that same note, perhaps for you, which has been, I think, one of the major stories within our history that perhaps was covered so well, be it TV, radio, newspaper, that you still remember till today?
Oh, there are many stories that were covered well, sometimes in difficult situations. The Mlolongo of 88, I think they tried, despite, because that's when, you see, when you have these restrictions, the mainstream media were gagged or gagged themselves. And that gave room for the alternative media. And we saw the alternative media come and say, this is what's going on.
Right.
So the Mlolongo coverage was very good. And it showed kind of emerging freedom, that people could say, okay, this is what's going on, we are going to do it. And you see some of the alternative media that were gaining momentum. They lost afterwards, but at that time, Beyond, Financial Review, Finance, you know, and you look at what and Pius Nyamora's Society, and Gitobi Manyara's Nairobi Law Monthly. They were in the forefront. So whatever the mainstream media would not cover, they covered.
And that sort of open space and a sense of freedom. That's where things began to change and shape the media?
They began to change. You could see signs. But the Mlolongo election was really an eye-opener to a lot of people.
Wow.
You see, with the Mlolongo, you can see people. These are 5, and these are 50. And you are told that the 5 have won.
And
you know, so when people say, wait a minute, what's going on?
And that sort of atmosphere then really opened conversation.
It changed completely. Gradually, people lost fear that they are talking about. And even in the classroom, people are afraid that some people are listening. Some students hardly graduated, but they were always there. So there was that element. So, but with the Mlolongo, things changed. And because the media covered the Mlolongo so well, that's how Joshua Karanja became a vice president.
Wow. So Rose Lukalo, at that time, being a journalist in 1990, and now, what I'm getting, if there's one big difference, is this freedom of speech then and now. Could you paint for us another difference between being a journalist then and being a journalist now?
I think also just giving voice to people who haven't had voice before.
Right.
And I think one of the things that a lot of people still comment when I meet them is that we allowed them to speak, whereas the media at that time was so gagged. So there are a lot of people, you talk to the Orengos, the former CJ, William Tungas, the Martha Karuas, they had no space in the media, you know, and so the new media that came in actually were giving space to other opinion, not just political opinion, the issues of gender, the issues of
Women,
HIV, AIDS, women, children's rights and abuse, you know. So I think many of those issues were not covered in the mainstream before. It was more it was so tightly controlled by political interests that the conversation that came out was either politics or business. So we ended up, you have a situation where, like, I was at Kenya Times, the defunct Kenya Times, briefly for about 9 months, and they would run the Kanu briefs based on NIS. We have NIS now. They would just take everything that they know, personal things about you, and use them to hurt you and publish them in a paper, you know. Today that would be completely illegal. You could go to court, you could sue for invasion of privacy. You know, there are a lot of laws that have come in place. There are a lot of new values and new standards that have come into place which protect even a journalist doing the work. You can say, we can't run this, we will be sued.
So as a journalist at that time, you could do a story that doesn't sit well with the who's who, and tomorrow you're embarrassed on national TV or newspaper because you did a story that needed to be highlighted.
They would do anything to finish you, anything.
So then what changed? Because now, and that's why I say my era gets to enjoy what you guys fought for as journalists then. We stand on your shoulders, we're able to tell stories freely. So what changed then?
I wouldn't even say it's my era. I think it's progressive. So long as journalists remain true to the values, each generation pushes the space a little bit more and adds to the Kenya we want to become. So I think what we did was actually, and specifically if I speak about KTN, was to take on issues and concerns and voices that we know would rankle a little bit, you know, but you know that you're speaking for the public. You know that there's a public interest that you're serving. So like, for example, you take on, they kept calling them ethnic clashes, and we know that they're being politically instigated.
Right.
And so start to use the language of the truth, because people know what's happening on the ground. You know, I mean, I always say, like, media is not people's only source of information. People have other sources of information by which they measure you. So we would speak to what is ailing people on the ground.
Right. So even on that generation factor, perhaps as media, we do have a role to tell, when it comes to playing, to tell stories of our history to this new generation, right? For example, the Mulolonga election. How will then our children get to know that this was one of those things that changed and shaped the Kenya's history? So perhaps as media, could you just comment on that, the role that we have to play in telling our history, not just breaking news and covering referendums and corruption stories, which is fantastic, but also telling the history of our country to the new generation?
Actually, the principle that what is not documented does not exist. I mean, that's where the media, I look at the media coming from. And taking advantage of what I said before, the proliferation of the media. I mean, like now we see we've got vernacular media, we've got all modems of relaying news. And I think what the media needs to do as we move forward is that I think the issue of self-censorship they should really deal with. I mean, before you would find that in a newsroom, even the editorial policies were actually a matter of national security, because the editors would even be summoned or even be asked, like, can we see what you are going to... And I think also we almost had a danger of that coming back. We have to see what you publish before it goes out. And those are some of the things that I think the then Moi regime relied on to curtail and to censor the media. But taking advantage of the technological divide that we have, the information technology age that we are going into.
Social media.
There's no way the media is unstoppable. I mean, the citizen journalism. These are not people per se in the newsroom, but these are people even outside the newsroom who can be able to rely and document news. So I think there's also competition out there. So if you don't style up, you'll be put on line.
One line to what he's saying, because I think in our days, I don't know if it has changed, but we were always told to background a story.
To background. Yes. No, you taught that in journalism. Give a bit of a background.
You have less and less time. I know stories are getting shorter and shorter. Time pressure is getting more and more to turn out stories. But I think sometimes we miss the background of where we've come. And even just a line that would, ignite interest might be useful.
Professor Mnene, as a history lecturer, perhaps I'd love to hear your contribution to that, especially the aspect of how, as media, we have a role to play in telling our history to the new generation.
Yeah, the media is very important in reminding people where they came from, where they are, and maybe where they might be going, and as a warning, yeah, so they can play that. But there is a bigger problem in the country, and this is the anti-history attitude. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we hear from politicians and people of places of influence, such that in our schools, and we complain that people have lost value of direction, yet we refuse to teach from baby school to the university the history.
So it even begins with our own education.
Sure, we need to, Amina Mohammed needs to look at this thing. It's terrible that people graduate from Kenyan universities without ever having taken a class
in history.
On the history of Kenya. Forget about the history of Kenya.
Because we learn colonial history.
There's something wrong with that. So you go to other countries, and I've checked with them, and they say, before you can talk about anything else, know your country. Huh? So know how it came up to be, what is it that has shaped it the way it is, and once you've done that, then you can be sure that things will work out almost perfectly. But right now, you're in a mess.
Closing remarks, perhaps we can keep it short and straightforward. I'll begin with Rose as I calm down. How social media has changed storytelling?
Wow, it has really changed. I mean, I'm even having to shut down my social media.
Really?
There are too many messages, and there are about too many topics. And I think social media is kind of diluting our attention span and our ability really to focus and get an issue done.
All right, Professor Mnene, yours?
Well, I think the space has opened very widely. The problem is choosing now. And we need to be guided on the right choices in order not to get lost. Right now, many of us are lost because of the too many choices.
Okay, Ivan Sofula?
There's a thin line between fake news and factual news. With the social media you've had now about fake stories, now everybody can go to his platform and report anything. And so the thin line between what is factual and what is not factual. And the consumers of news out there are influenced by whatever they read or whatever they see.
Very true. All right, so Rose Lukalo, Professor Mnene, and Ivan Swafula, thank you so much for being part of this conversation and really contributing to it. All right, so we want to take another quick commercial break, but before we do so, a recap of our top story at this hour. At least 42 people are feared dead in a grisly road accident involving a Kakamega-bound bus. The accident occurred at Fort Tena Riricho along the Kisumu-Mohorini Highway. The bus belonging to Western Cross Express had about 52 passengers on board. Again, at least 42 people are feared dead in a grisly road accident involving a Kakamega-bound bus. Now, this accident occurred at Fort Tena Riricho along the Kisumu-Mohorini Highway. The bus belonging to Western Cross Express had about 52 passengers on board. Those are the pictures.